On the evening of July 11th, 2010, much of the world was united by a single event, the FIFA World Cup final. For the first time in history, the tournament had been held in Africa, and millions were glued to their screens. Uganda. The night carried a sense of celebration that went far beyond just football. For young, middle-class fans, the World Cup was more than just sport. It was a chance to gather, to escape, and to be part of something much bigger than themselves. At the Kyadondo Rugby Club, hundreds of chairs had been arranged neatly in front of a massive outdoor screen. The atmosphere was vibrant, fueled by cheering fans and the flow of cheap liquor. Imagine, for just $2, that's around 200 Kenyan shillings, attendees were given 2 bottles of Guinness, a deal that packed the grounds to capacity. Elsewhere in the city, another hotspot, the Ethiopian Village restaurant in Kampala, had also filled to the brim. Both locations were buzzing with energy, strangers becoming friends for the night, bound together by the spectacle of the World Cup. But behind this festive atmosphere, something sinister was lacking, something the fans could not see and would never expect. When halftime arrived, the Ethiopian village was suddenly ripped apart by a deafening explosion. Glass shattered, bodies collapsed, and in the chaos, screams filled the night. Dozens lay injured or worse, yet just miles away. At the Kyadondo, the crowd had no idea what had just happened. They continued cheering. At 11:18 p.m., the unimaginable happened. A blast tore through Kyadondo Rugby Club, shaking the ground beneath the fans' feet. People screamed, panic erupted, and then, 5 seconds later, a second explosion detonated. The celebration was over. In a matter of moments, the night transformed from joy to pure horror. What unfolded that evening was not just another act of violence, it was the deadliest terrorist attack in East Africa since the 1998 US Embassy bombings, a coordinated assault designed not just to kill, but to instill fear across the entire nation. But before we go further into this rabbit hole, I need to pause here and talk to you guys directly. If you've been following this channel for a while, you've noticed we've been quiet, too quiet, and here's why. We got hit with a lawsuit. Back on July 15th, we dropped a video about the Akasha cartel. We told the story of how the Akasha family rose and fell, and how they played the justice system like it was their personal playground in the early 2000s. We dug into public records, referenced credible news sources, and only talked about what was already documented, nothing more, nothing less. But the crazy part, the video is gone, completely wiped. Not because we wanted to, but because legal pressure forced it down. And this is where it gets real. We honestly believe this lawsuit isn't about facts or defamation, it's about silencing. It's about making sure people like us, small creators, students, people without resources can't shine light on stories that powerful people once buried. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, and it's expensive. Legal aid is helping, but the truth is, fighting these cases costs money. Money we don't really have. That's why we are reaching out. If you believe in what we do, if you think stories like this deserve to be told, we are asking you to support us. Every little bit counts. Even the smallest contribution makes a huge difference. Because here at Nairobi Insight, we don't run from tough stories. We don't hide, we don't stay silent. We believe in telling the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes the people in power. So, if you are new here, subscribe. If you've been riding with us, thank you. And if you want to help us fight this legal mess, you already know, we appreciate you more than words can say. To fully understand what happened that night in Kampala, we need to go back to a time when East Africa was becoming a new battleground for terror. In the late 2000s, Somalia was collapsing under the weight of its own instability. Civil war and famine had already torn the nation apart, leaving it one of the poorest countries on earth. And with no strong central government to hold it together, the void was quickly filled. But no, not with peace, with the radical ideology. Among the groups that rose from this chaos was Al-Ittihad al-Islami, an Islamist movement intent on creating a strict religious state within Somalia. And from its younger, more extreme followers came something far deadlier, al-Shabaab. By 2003, this splinter group had begun waging a campaign of violence across Somalia. They allied themselves with a network of Islamic courts and by 2006 had seized control of Mogadishu, the capital. For a moment, it looked like their vision of Islamist rule might actually take hold, but neighboring Ethiopia had a problem with the backing of Somalia's fragile transitional government. It launched an invasion, pushing al-Shabaab out of the capital. On the surface, it seemed like victory. In reality, it was just the beginning. Driven into southern Somalia, al-Shabaab adapted. In 2009, Ethiopian forces had withdrawn from Mogadishu. Control of the capital was handed over to the African Union Peacekeeping Mission, a coalition of troops drawn from several nations, including Uganda and Kenya. For al-Shabaab, this was seen as direct provocation. The group had already established itself as one of the most dangerous militant organizations in East Africa, but now its attention began shifting outward toward the very countries it believed was standing in the way of its expansion. Uganda became the clearest enemy. In March 2007, it was the first country to send troops into Somalia under the African Union mission in Somalia known as AMISOM. Uganda contributed thousands of soldiers, police officers, and trainers. Its forces weren't just fighting, they were also responsible for training Somali government troops, essentially acting as one of the primary obstacles standing between al-Shabaab and total control. To the group, this was unforgivable. Al-Shabaab had begun issuing warnings, repeated chilling threats that Uganda's involvement in Somalia would not go unpunished. And behind those words, they were planning something far more devastating. At the time, Uganda's presence in Somalia was significant, over 6,000 troops in some of the country's most volatile regions. Sector commanders and generals oversaw multiple battle groups across Mogadishu and beyond. On paper, Uganda looked like a stabilizing force, but in reality, every deployment, every training camp, every operation was drawing al-Shabaab's hatred closer to Kampala. And as history would soon prove, the militants intended to make good on their threats. All of this set the stage for that night in July 2010. The night when football fans gathered believing they were safe, completely unaware that they had been marked as targets in a war they never signed up for. For many, it was meant to be an ordinary Sunday evening, a night of football and celebration. But in an instant, the World Cup final became a scene of horror. By the time the night ended, at least 76 people had been killed, most of them at the rugby club. Families, friends, and strangers lay scattered across the grounds, their lives cut short in the blink of an eye. The day after the attack, the Somali Islamist movement al-Shabaab publicly claimed responsibility. It was a chilling moment. The 2010 twin bombings marked the first time the group, which had little support among ordinary Somalis, had become a powerful fighting force. It had struck beyond Somalia's border. The attack confirmed what many feared. Al-Shabaab had become an international terror organization capable of carrying out sophisticated, lethal attacks in other nations. The world reacted with shock and condemnation. 2 years prior, in February 2008, the United States had formally designated al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization. Yet, the Kampala Bombings brought the threat into sharp relief. South Africa, still hosting the World Cup, described the attack as a barbaric act of terrorism. US President Barack Obama condemned the attackers as cowardly, and Britain's Foreign Secretary William Hague echoed the sentiment. Despite global outrage, these words could not undo the pain of the victims' families or the lives that had been brutally taken. Among the dead were people from multiple nations. One American citizen, along with Ethiopian, Congolese, and Indian nationals, was killed or injured in the blast. The international dimension of the attack drew immediate attention, highlighting the growing reach of al-Shabaab and the urgent need for cross-border cooperation in counter-terrorism efforts. Almost immediately, FBI agents began sifting through the debris at Kyadondo Rugby Club. The efficiency of their work was remarkable, almost as if they had been on standby, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Uganda had formally requested assistance through the US Embassy in Kampala, prompting the FBI New York Joint Terrorism Task Force (JTTF) to dispatch a team of agents, analysts, and forensic experts. Their mission was to assist Ugandan authorities in piecing together the horrific events, analyzing the scene, and collecting evidence that could identify the perpetrators. The team included specialists from across the United States, each with expertise in different aspects of the investigation, from explosive analysis to evidence collection and operational planning. They work alongside Ugandan investigators in a coordinated effort to understand the methods, motives, and network behind the attack. The collaboration reflected the severity of the incident and underscored the determination of the international community to hold the attackers accountable. That night and the days that followed revealed the stark reality of living under the threat of global terrorism. The attack did more than just take lives. It signaled a new chapter in al-Shabaab's evolution and the vulnerability of nations involved in counter-terrorism operations beyond their borders. The next day, in the upmarket Kabalagala suburb where the Ethiopian Village restaurant had been, the scene was grim. A policeman, clenching an AK-47, perched atop a land statue at the restaurant gates, his eyes scanning the destroyed bar area. Passers-by peered over the fence, taking in the chaos. Glass littered the ground, furniture was upturned, and amid the wreckage lay a single sandal and a black shoe. At least 15 people had been killed here. Local intelligence officials were less surprised than the public. Just months earlier, the government had distributed posters throughout Kampala, which has a large Somali community, warning that a terrorist attack might occur. Yet, even forewarning did little to prepare the city for the devastation. In a somber precision, President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, preceded by his son Muhoozi Kainerugaba, visited the scene in Kabalagala before proceeding to Kyadondo Rugby grounds. Museveni surveyed the destruction, shaking his head, wondering how an attack of such magnitude could unfold in such a confined space. From there, he went to Mulago Hospital, where hundreds of desperate Ugandans lined up, searching for missing relatives. Amid the grief, questions surfaced about Ugandans' involvement in the peacekeeping mission in Somalia. Many asked whether sending troops there was worth it, especially as Ugandans were dying fighting al-Shabaab in a country with no direct strategic interest for Uganda. Yet others, standing beneath the tree where lists of the dead and injured had been posted, were simply trying to come to terms with the scale of the loss. One father, Augustine Luembo, told his story. His son, Nicholas, 26 at the time, had gone to watch the World Cup final at the rugby club with friends. At midnight, I heard there was a bomb blast. I tried to phone Nicholas, but he did not answer. At 2 a.m., his phone rang. the caller was not Nicholas, but a policeman who had found his mobile. He said to me, "The owner of this phone is dead," Luembo recounted, his voice heavy with grief. Now, get this. As hundreds gathered at the mortuary near Mulago Hospital, mortuary attendants made an astonishing discovery. Junior Semeju, a carpenter and stage organizer with the Silk Events Uganda, had been brought in among the dead the night before, was actually alive for 15 hours. He had lain in the morgue unnoticed amid the casualties. When staff realized he was breathing, he was rushed on a stretcher to the intensive care unit (ICU). Medical reports later revealed he had suffered a cracked skull and was scheduled for surgery the next day, 13th July 2010. He survived, but the physical trauma and the social aftermath of nearly being declared dead left deep scars. Across the city, survivors were coming to terms with what had happened, haunted by the random strokes of fate that had spared them. One, Hilary Habimana, pondered the unlikely luck that saw him and his friend alive after the blast. Luck or sheer chance saved others as well. Among the first to arrive at Kyadondo Rugby grounds that evening, some spectators had taken seats in the third row up front, but when they stepped away to buy airtime and returned, their perfect seats had been taken. The strangers occupying them were killed in the first blast. Similarly, two brothers survived because one stepped away to take a phone call, and when the other went to check on him, the bombs went off. Vincent Ndale and his Filipino fiancée, Nettie Solis, was spared by a cruel twist of fate, but not shielded from the horror. When the blast ripped through Kyadondo, a severed head fell at their feet, an image that will remain burned into their memories. Their civil wedding was scheduled just 2 days later. "I can't believe I am here and I am going to get married after that bomb blast," Solis said, her words carrying a mix of disbelief and determination. Despite everything, they resolved to proceed with their wedding, a quiet act of defiance against the terror that had surrounded them. The devastation could have been worse. A fourth bomb was discovered in Makindye the day after the attacks, threatening to compound the horror. At 4 p.m., police safely detonated the device at a popular hangout called Makindye House after a suspicious bag had been left on a table that night prior. Police Chief Kale Kyuhura, Uganda's longest-serving Inspector General of Police, explained responsible, with Kyuhura telling New Vision that these people had orchestrated the attack. While Ugandan authorities moved to investigate, Will Ross, the BBC's East Africa correspondent, offered a more circumspect of While Ugandan authorities moved to investigate, Will Ross, the BBC's East Africa correspondent, offered a more circumspect observation. He noted that there was no definitive proof of al-Shabaab involvement and suggested the blast could be linked to next year's elections in Uganda. Yet, al-Shabaab had already publicly claimed responsibility the day after the attack. As grieving families buried their loved ones and international investigators arrived, the Ugandan police prepared to act decisively. On 13th July 2010, just 2 days after the bombings, the police, in coordination with Interpol, announced 4 initial arrests. In the days that followed, authorities released a reconstructed photo of the men believed to have been in the suicide bombers, one Ugandan and one Somali, offering the first tangible insight into those who had carried out one of the deadliest attacks in Uganda's history. On 16th July 2010, the spiritual leader of the now global terrorist network al-Shabaab confirmed what investigators had long suspected. The Kampala Bombings had been carried out by a cell named after an al-Qaeda and al-Shabaab leader who had been killed in Somalia the previous year, Sheikh Mukhtar Abdiraham Abu Zebuye. Forgive me if I get the name incorrect. In an audio tape released to Somali media, stated that the cell responsible for the twin bombings in Uganda was known as Saleh Ali Saleh Naban. In the aftermath, police investigators uncovered two unidentified heads among the wreckage, believed to belong to the suicide attackers who carried out the devastating blasts that killed at least 73 people. According to BBC and New Vision, on the same day, Ugandan authorities announced the arrest of more than 20 suspects in coordinated citywide operations, continuing the painstaking investigation into the attacks. Many of those arrested were Muslims, which at first glance risks oversimplifying the complex motivations of extremist groups. While al-Shabaab cloaks its operation in religious rhetoric, the attacks were fundamentally driven by political, ideological, and territorial objectives rather than genuine religious belief. At the same time, ordinary Muslims across Uganda lived in fear of prosecution by the police. Anyone who was an adult at the time can attest to the tension in communities, the fear of being arbitrarily detained or interrogated. Among those arrested were several Pakistanis and one Ugandan who had been apprehended in Kenya through Interpol, demonstrating the international reach of the investigation. By now, the pattern is clear. Uganda was enduring retribution for its role in the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia, and as citizens looked around at the devastation, both at home and abroad, many asked the same question that echoed through the city in the days after the bombings. Why did Ugandans have to die? Whether in Kampala or the front lines in Somalia, the anger, grief, and fear intertwined. A city and a nation grappling with consequences far beyond their borders. In the months following the attacks, justice began to take its slow course. 3 Kenyans, Hussein Hassan Agade, Idris Ahmed Yulima, Idris Mugundu, along with 10 others, were formally charged with 76 counts of murder. The Chief Magistrate Elias Kakoza committed them to the Ugandan High Court for trial, setting the stage for what will become one of the most high-profile terrorism cases in the country's history. At the High Court, the charges were laid out with meticulous detail. The first charge, comprising 3 counts, accused the first 12 defendants of committing acts of terrorism. The first count concerned the discharge of explosives at Kyadondo Rugby Club. The second count addressed the explosive at the Ethiopian Village restaurant, and the third count accused them of the delivery or placement of explosives in Makindye House. The second charge focused on membership in a terrorist organization. The first 12 were accused of belonging to al-Shabaab, listed under the law as a terrorist organization and affiliated with Al-Qaeda. The third charge was the most substantial, 76 counts of murder. Each count specified with the defendants caused the death, with malice aforethought of the individuals named in each count. The location of these murders, Kyadondo Rugby Club and the Ethiopian Village restaurant, were clearly indicated, linking the accused directly to the scenes of the attack. The fourth charge involved 10 counts of attempted murder. The particulars stated that the defendant attempted to kill 10 individuals, again specifying either Kyadondo Rugby Club or the Ethiopian Village restaurant as the locations where these attempts took place. The fifth charge singled out the 13th defendant, charged alone with 2 counts, being an accessory after the fact. In the first count, he was accused of receiving Idris Nsboga, knowing he had committed an act of terrorism and assisting him to escape. In the second count, the particulars were the same, but he aided Hassan Haruma Luyima. Finally, he faced a single count of aiding and abetting terrorism. The charge alleged that in various locations across Uganda, he supported al-Shabaab, knowing or reasonably believing that the assistance would be used in connection with acts of terrorism, namely the July 2010 Kampala twin bombings. The case was much a legal odyssey, as it was a reckoning with the horrors of that night. A painstaking attempt to link individual actors to a tragedy that had left Kampala reeling and the nation demanding accountability. The trial stretched on, filling 84 pages of court judgment. Though we'll spare the tedious minutiae and focus on what truly mattered. One fact stood out. John Kagazi, a uniquely aggressive and robust state attorney on the case, had secured 4 confessions from the accused. The prosecution's case was in capable hands, but it was Alfonso Chigmago Owin Dolo, the fierce prosecutor, who ultimately delivered the judgment. The judgment closed a harrowing chapter in Uganda's legal history, a painstaking attempt to mete out accountability for one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in East Africa, balancing confessions, evidence, and the human cost of the July 2010 Kampala bombings. Some were sentenced to life imprisonment, others freed, but the shadow of that night will linger forever in the minds of survivors, families, and the nation. Nairobi Insight.